Good evening, and welcome to CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homonoff, and thank you for joining us this evening. My guest is Joseph Jaffe, who is the CEO of digital brand marketing agency Evol8tion, an author in the field of advertising and media, and a general agent provocateur. Would that be accurate? Joseph, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
And let me dive into the agency business today. You run a very unique agency, which we can talk about, but step back more broadly, and it feels like the model of the advertising agency has been under stress for forever. What does it look like today in the broader marketplace, and where do you see it going?
Well, I've always fascinated or fixated on this idea of the agency of the future. And what does it mean to be an evolving agency? And I kind of looked at it a couple ways. If you go back historically even and look at the business, from the days of traffic and production, the Don Draper days, the glory days of Madison Avenue, if you will. And you can kind of fast forward to the British invasion when the strategic planners and the account planners come in, and that changes the business. And then you can kind of fast forward to the unbundling of media and the creation of the media independence. And that became another evolution in the model. But really, what happened since? Well, the digital revolution, for sure, where suddenly you have new capabilities and new skill sets or departments. The analyst, there never used to be an analyst, and to a degree, web development, or at least programmers, to a degree. And I would say that we haven't really seen much innovation since. Maybe the influx of content people, in a sense. What I've tried to do, in fact, with my previous agency called Crayon, which was a social media boutique or a social boutique, is I wanted to create the conversation department or the conversation analyst, someone who really was a specialist or subject matter expert in conversation. Today, I would argue that in order to survive and thrive, an agency must have a robust technology capability and offering. And I'm not just talking about web development or programmers. I'm talking about actually having technology products, recurring revenue, or a new business model, if you will, that actually bakes technology in, whether it's an authoring tool or a subscription-based type of service. Agencies have got to, ultimately it's always going to come down to one thing, and that's compensation. And where the agency model has done particularly poorly is actually in two departments. One is talent, and two is compensation. And of course they're related directly. Yeah. Until we fix both of them, the agency is going to struggle to keep up, at least keep pace with, I would say, the just incredible, increasing disruption that we're witnessing every day.
Do you see it's your, you've described kind of your model of the agency of the future. Do you see people or agencies, people doing that now? Is there much getting that from your perspective? Are there examples that you point to and go, well, they're doing it well, these guys seem to have a handle on it, or is kind of nobody getting it yet?
I would say there are little pockets, and I'll use the pun intentionally, anomalies of agencies that are kind of looking at different business models, because there is an agency called Anomaly that are trying to look at vertical integration plays in terms of creating products, in terms of really owning the whole end-to-end of the supply chain, even to a degree, creating new products, new solutions, branding them, co-owning them, co-developing them. But they are anomalies for the most part, exceptions. And this business is all about scale and all about consistency and norms. And so we're not really seeing that across the board. I think where the agency model is just flying towards is automation and the whole programmatic and native. But to me, my concern there is, I once met a really smart man who at the time worked for Motorola, and he said to me, there are two types of people in the world. There are numerator people and denominator people, and you kind of get it automatically, right? The numerator people are sky's the limit. There is the upside is limited to our imagination. The denominator people are the cost cutters and all about mitigating risk and kind of eliminating, or trying to kind of tweak the model from a cost standpoint. I think where the agency model is right now, especially with the holding companies, is how can we make the model as efficient as possible? How can we find any lost, and this is a day and age of where we live in austerity, Sarbanes-Oxley, procurement. Yep. So we are our own worst enemy, but the entire ecosystem is designed to kind of find that last remaining inefficient dollar and be able to extract it. And where's the creativity? Where's the ability to say, what does the future look like? What does the upside look like?
Why do you think creativity, in a sense, is so, we're described as an age where, in a sense, sort of intellectual firepower is so important. Why does it seem as though in this world maybe we've lost the valuation of creativity itself in favor of, as you say, sort of algorithms and sort of the technological infrastructure? Why has that happened? Are we just behind the curve, or is there something fundamentally wrong that is undervaluing creativity out there?
Well, I think the first thing comes down to the definition of creativity. Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about an art director and a copywriter coming up with fancy pictures and fancy copy, well, that's a traditional and almost a staid, I think, definition or interpretation of creativity. One definition that I found, and this takes me all the way back almost 10 years, I created a roadshow, a conference series called The Battle for the Heart. And the A in heart was capitalized. And the whole idea was, at the time I was immersed in the whole digital space. And I was saying, why is it that in this business today, and specifically even online, we're not seeing art, we're seeing science, we're seeing analytics, we're seeing left brain instead of right brain, in a sense. And so I kind of looked at this battle for the heart as a means to almost re-inject creativity. Now, the definition I found at the time of creativity was productive originality, which basically means doing things differently, originality, mm-hmm. to get a result, which is productivity. And of course, that would make you think of, wait, isn't it Einstein who said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, which is, the next tagline, the next agency, the next review, the next ability to try and be funny in a crass sort of way on the Super Bowl. So I think creativity can come in analytics. Creativity can come from technology, from optimization. I think we almost have to change the way that we even define creativity. And for me, where I've put all my stock right now is in this convergence between technology and marketing. So the convergence of Madison Avenue and Mountain View, because I use this when I have a vision presentation that I give on Madison and Mountain View. And I say, one thing that we hear in the space is there are no new ideas. Certainly when you talk to startups, right? Whatever idea you're coming up with right now or you're working on, trust me, there are 5 people doing it right now. So there's this idea that all the original ideas have been created and all we're doing are cheap derivatives or kind of reinterpretations of that idea. But I reject that notion. My Sherpa is Walt Disney, who said, if you can dream it, you can do it. And I think today, technology makes anything possible. Technology can solve any business problem or marketing challenge. And so if you're doing that and being original and being disruptive and productive, is that not the ultimate definition or interpretation of creativity?
So the question I would have now is, are the marketers, the brands, and you can't put them, I realize, into brands, into a generic category, but are they ready for a new way of thinking about it, a more effective way of tapping into creativity? Or are they part of the problem of, rather than just blame the agencies, are the brands, the marketers, part of the problem of looking for the tried and true to keep, trying to reinvent some magic that they may have had years ago?
When I wrote my first book, which was called Life After the 30-Second Spot, I wrote it 10 years ago. And I remember clearly I said, who's to blame? And then I said, of course it's the agencies. And then I just laid into the agencies for about a page and a half. The very next paragraph was called of course it's the brands or the marketers,
right.
and then I laid into the marketers. In other words, it really is a two-way street. So, it is the marketers. In fact, one of the things, we worked on a program, Evol8tion, we worked on a program for one of our clients, Mondelez International, where 9 brands actually did 9 pilot programs with 9 startups in 90 days. And we actually asked all of the brand managers afterwards, has this changed the way that you think about marketing? And will you do marketing? Will you go about your day-to-day differently? And what came out of it was, again, going back to that point, we need to challenge our agencies to come back with bold ideas, with braver ideas. We need to challenge them to do better. We need to challenge them to raise the bar. But then they also said, we've got to allow them to do that as well. We have to give them that little bit of wiggle room and latitude and empower them to also come back with these bold ideas. So come back with the idea, but then give them the ability to actually execute on that idea. And unfortunately, it either works where both are kind of operating, in perfect harmony, or it becomes an absolute catch-22 where they're canceling each other out. And it's a zero-sum game where nobody wins under those conditions.
Is part of the problem people not willing to, and especially as you mentioned, we're in this kind of age of austerity. Everybody's been, since certainly the financial crisis, concerned about costs. Are people in a vacuum saying, yeah, I'd really like something new and different and exciting, but I'm not willing to pay for it? Is that a part of the problem too?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that for the most part, ideas and creativity and strategic thinking is often almost bundled in as added value, where a value is placed on an output, an ad, a banner, a mini site, a campaign, as opposed to an outcome. So we need to value outcomes above outputs. That's the one way. But the other one comes down to ROI, and it's the ability to, again, bring me big ideas that can change the world, that can obliterate our competition, that can transform our entire business and business model, lifetime value of the customer, long-term thinking, but yet we're held to short-term, quarterly earnings and short-term goals and short-term gains. That's the other contradiction or the catch-22. So going back to the startup world, for example, it's a small pilot program to test, to get your, to dip your toes in the water, as opposed to, our ultimate elevator pitch is something we do in under 140 characters, which is, what if Kodak acquired Instagram? What might have happened? And that ... question mark is amazing. It's incredible because that's when the light bulb goes off. And by the way, speaking about big brands and small startups, Under Armour just acquired MapMyFitness for $150 million. Zipcar was acquired by Avis for $500 million. So we're actually seeing these big type of M&A transactions happening, big thinking, where big brands realize that their salvation might lie in early stage collaboration with early stage startups. But to get there, it takes it's not just an incremental step. It is a leap of faith that has to, to mix metaphors, cross a chasm.
So those kinds of transactions you're talking about, do you fear, or we're in an early stage, of course, in this. Is this about another bubble potentially, and people who maybe even the purchasing like that is a shortcut to creativity and saying, oh, somebody else looks like they have a good idea, let's just buy it? Or are you seeing at least some of these in an early stage, well, that sounds particularly exciting, like a particularly good combination, and not just throwing a lot of money at something because you're desperate?
Well, I'll say part of the answer is I hope it is a bubble at least in terms of WhatsApp being valued at $19 billion, or the Snapchats, the Groupons of the world. But where I see particular value and upside is not the short term, but the early stage, the upstream collaboration, when startups are particularly young and looking for a longer term partner. That's where I see some interesting combinations or permutations. So the bubble itself, here's another way to think about it. And I say this obviously, with a smile on my face, because this is how I provoke, right? Which is, how is it that two schmucks, in San Francisco could never get a cab?
By the way, we're on cable, so you can say schmucks. It's excellent. Yeah.
I can say other words too. No, how is it possible that these two schmucks in San Francisco that could never get a cab or a car when they needed one could start ... Uber, right?
Yeah.
And of course, $19 billion later. But here's my point. Of course, they're not schmucks, but I'm saying this in context of talking to a multinational, a blue chip brand with 5,000 marketers globally, and I'm saying, why is it that these two guys can create this amount of value and utility? By the way, look at how it's changed the way that we connect now in terms of in a transportation ecosystem, and yet these big brands are laboring and sluggish and trying to figure out what their next tagline is going to be. So I think when you kind of position it that way, first of all, the stakes have never been higher, but also at the same time, isn't that going to embolden and empower a big brand to say, wait a second, how much is that going to cost? And I'm going to respond by saying less than the cost of a Super Bowl commercial. If it doesn't exist already, go create it yourself. That's where I think it gets really exciting. Go do it yourself. Why wouldn't you be a startup or think like a startup? And of course, the answer is, I can give you 1,000 reasons.
Right.
But because companies are built and structured ultimately to be bureaucratic and dysfunctional and siloed, and I'm sure you know this quote, which is, CMOs got to be where they are today, not by managing risk, but by mitigating it. And I just don't think that is enough to cut it anymore.
Well, how about, where do you see the publishers fitting into this? And by publishers, I mean broadly, it might be media platforms, networks, major online sites, et cetera. Where are they in this? Are they another potentially part of a creative solution here? Or do they, because they're trying to protect a whole lot of money, $70 billion flowing through the 30-second spot business, et cetera, are they a part of the solution, part of the problem, somewhere in between?
They're probably in a maybe the toughest position right now. So in my new book, Zero, the subhead is...
By the way, I want to point out, you may not necessarily be the first author on the show, but you're the first author that brought a book with him. So you got to get kudos for that. So
that wasn't for the interview. That was just as a
gift
to you.
I appreciate it. So,
but the idea of Zero is zero paid media as the new marketing model. So the vision is that brands move from being tenants to landlords. So you rent media, but you own assets, and you can monetize assets and therefore monetize marketing. That's the pitch for Zero. So if you're a publisher, you are a middleman. You are an intermediary. And in a way, the vision of Zero is, why on earth would you need to rent and go through a middleman or through an intermediary when you can be a Red Bull, when you can actually own the asset and figure out ways to leverage it? And what is an asset? Your content, your data, your apps, your people, your products, your stores, your packaging. So many assets that can be leveraged, your human beings, your employees. So if you're a publisher, you've got really two, you are stuck between a rock and a hard place. But the one thing is, why not innovate yourself? As the old saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. So one of those, what if Kodak had acquired Instagram? Or what if Condé Nast had acquired, Flipboard? So suddenly you're like, oh, wait a second. Why are we not figuring out new ways to go direct, or to build this relationship, or to ultimately monetize our incredible content? So it's tough, in a way. As I say, don't shoot the messenger. But when you've got all these brands trying to be publishers and real-time marketers and having content strategies, it's not me. I'm not the kind of, the angel of death here. I'm just the messenger saying, all of your clients are trying to disintermediate you. So therefore, what are you to do? And I think the answer is always going to come down to one word, which is innovation.
So if you are Evol8tion is you're serving that branding community and sort of tying together, as you mentioned, sort of the Madison and Mountain View, both the technology side of the world and and the brand side of the world. What do you have to do to make that kind of partnership work well? What do you have to do in terms of creating your own firm that has the skill sets to be valuable to both sides of it? And what are you hearing from the two sides about what you're doing?
Well, you know, one of our clients, in fact, is a media company, one of the largest media companies. And, you know, they're great. They're fantastic to work with because they're open, because they recognize the importance and the value of innovating their delivery, their whole pipe and their whole delivery, you know, mechanism in a sense. So, you know, technology can help. There's no question. For me, what's really exciting when you think about, you know, we always used to say marketing was, or advertising was about the right message, you know, to the right person, you know, and we kind of like said the right place at the right time, but we really didn't know how to do the right place and the right time very well to get the right result, in a sense. So now when you start to actually think about innovating that, even the 30-second spot, there is so much you can do. You know, when you, I mean, I see little things like when you pause your TiVo, a little banner pops up. I like that. I don't find it to be intrusive at all. I chose to pause my live TV, and now I see a little ad. That's acceptable to me. But here's what's also acceptable, and I wrote about this in the first book. What if I could customize my own ads? If I'm looking to purchase a car, I'll tell you that. And I would love to see, you know, going through a midlife crisis, I would love to see convertible, you know, two-seater convertible, you know, commercials as opposed to minivan or SUV commercials. So I think that there is so much upside that comes from, you know, innovating that whole supply chain, whether you are a supplier or whether you are a buyer. And so I think part of the answer is, you know, we say there are four things: education, evaluation, execution, and exit. And so it starts off by just educating, get comfortable, you know, whether it's South by Southwest or CES or going on a little tour of Silicon Valley or Israel or where, you know, just familiarize yourself and get comfortable. Go work from a shared workspace. There's so many things to do to accept the fact that the world is speeding up, not slowing down. And the forces of change are accelerating and becoming increasingly disruptive. And because of that, the only way, you know, I use the analogy a lot of being on a treadmill. So, you know, if you are running at the same pace that the treadmill is kind of moving backwards, and that treadmill, you could say, represents time, you stand still. If, in fact, you stand still on the treadmill, you fly back and break your neck. You know, if you want to actually move forward, you have to run at a pace that is obviously, you know, quicker than the actual treadmill. Now, so that's easy as an analogy. Right. And if you just want to extend it slightly, well, guess what? Somehow that treadmill is getting faster and faster, and the incline is increasing. So what are you going to do? You're going to have to do a little bit more training, and that's education. So that's the first step.
Yeah. So where's the what are the pitfalls? What are the or some examples of where people haven't done it right, have missed something big, or that you know, kind of the horror stories, either in trying to be, I don't know if you can even be, as in your model, too aggressive, but not aggressive enough and missed out, done something badly. Are there some of those that either you have lived through or you've observed elsewhere?
I think the one that always gets talked about, and this is more of a category representation, are the times when a company said no, or a VC turned down a startup, right, or a brand you know, turned its back on a startup, and the startup ended up just you know, again, what if you know, Blockbuster had acquired Netflix? So I think that's the big danger. Right. The big danger is, you know, I'll give you a more recent example, and this is not a misstep or anything, but you've got Dollar Shave, right? So right, the Dollar Shave Club, and what that is doing or could do to Gillette, to this market leader, it's almost a monopoly when you think about the dominance of market share. So I think there's that what if analysis that looks at that, but I can also interpret that a different way, which is failure is only failure when it is absolute and when it is an end unto itself. When it becomes this ability to learn from your mistakes, and what startups do is they pivot. So wait a second, we created a hypothesis. Gee, I wonder what happens if I take my hand and I put it over this candle or this flame. You know, you prove or refute the hypothesis. You learn from it. You don't make the mistakes again. And if it works, you do it again and you figure out how to scale and amplify. And so I think it's really just getting, I think about this a lot, which is our society. I mean, if you think about sports, for example, a rite of passage is almost to be fired. Which major league, which major league or major league sport, player, or you look at whether it's the Tom Brady's who kind of got selected in the 48th round, or almost every manager that's been fired. It's almost the minute they're on the market, everybody's clamoring to get in and say, well, we want him, because we don't look at that firing as failure, but as kind of the cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. And yet in marketing and in the corporate world, anything that doesn't look like a stellar PR win is considered to be a sign of weakness. And until we change that culturally, there's always going to be a struggle to kind of take that chance, take that risk. As the old saying goes, it used to be no one ever got fired for putting TV on the plan. These days, it's no one ever got fired for putting Facebook on the plan. Soon it's going to be something else. But we've got to change that mentality of, being safe.
What do you see in the use of Facebook, Twitter, social media specifically? It almost feels like pretty quickly those platforms became their own established ecosystems, and they haven't been around very long. They feel like they've been around forever. But do you see a lot of innovation going on with brands on those platforms?
Not really, or not as much as I would like to see. But I think it's also endemic of this wave of threes, from ABC, CBS, and NBC to MSN, AOL, and Yahoo to, I suppose, Google, Facebook, and Twitter, or that interpretation. And by the way, there was once a little company called MySpace that came and went. So I think we see almost this Groundhog Day, cycle, vicious cycle occurring. And I think the challenge is, consumers, they grow up and then they grow out of these platforms when it becomes too popular or too mainstream. And so how do you create this self-sustaining model that is open, and it's never really a win-win, because either you're serving the customer or you're serving the marketer. And when you serve the marketer, you typically are not serving the customer, and vice versa, or the consumer. So, give Twitter credit for trying to fiddle with algorithms, and give Facebook, credit for all their acquisitions and the big rage and kerfuffle right now. Can we say that on cable? No, is stickers in comments. But that's not innovation. That is not changing the game. That is, that again is incrementalism as well. Until the next social network or the next communications platform comes along. If you just look at my kids' generation right now, they're not even on Facebook. They're on Instagram and Snapchat.
That's for old people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
They're on Snapchat and Instagram. Yeah. And they're not even using Instagram for photos. It's all about the comments, and then they delete the photos, and they're just, and they're just doing it because they're having a secure, private chat. And so it's bizarre. As a parent and a so-called expert, I'm looking at this and saying, and I wonder what the next generation is going to be. And the only thing I know, as they say, the only constant is change. So how do you create, if you're a brand or a media company, that self-sustaining, recurring revenue model that comes? It's virtually impossible. The only way to do it is to actually, break the whole model and build it up again. And so, what we see a lot of is this idea of, I call it, what's your heresy? Embrace your heresy. Embrace a world of zero paid media, because it's a much safer, ironically, place to start, which is, what if it all went away tomorrow? What if it was all text? What would you do then? Andy Grove, Intel's Andy Grove, he fired himself, and then he got rehired, and he came back and he said, what is the first thing that my successor would do if they came in tomorrow? And the answer was, get out of memory. And so, and until he did that, he was unable to break those shackles.
Well, with that, I will say thank you, Joseph, for joining us, and thank you for joining us on CITI Media Reporter. Good night.